Well, part two of who we are. If you survived part one, thank you, and let's move right into it. Part one ended with me going online to Coyote's website and, responding to the Become a Dealer tab. They responded quickly within a couple of days, and a gentleman named Tom MacArthur, who was the territory manager for Tennessee and some surrounding states, he contacted me and asked me where I lived and met me at a Chick-fil-A in the town I lived in, right outside of Nashville. And nice guy. Asked about me, asked about Larry Stovsand, asked what kind of tractor experience I had. A whole bunch of stuff. He talked about Coyote, he talked about the product, the company. I like the guy. Today, by the way, Tom MacArthur is a big muckety-muck with Coyote Corporate. I always tell him when I see him at a dealer meeting or, he calls or whatever, I always remind him that he is the world's smartest man because he signed us up for Coyote dealership. So, good guy. Well, we filled out all of the information that Coyote requested, and I mean it was extensive. It was, of course, financials and deep. They did deep dives. They wanted to make sure that we were upstanding citizens and financially viable and had a sense of business. So we filled out all the stuff, and then waited and waited and waited, and a month went by, 2 months went by, 3 months went by, and I was calling Tom quite routinely saying, what's going on? And he said, it's a process, man. He goes, they really, thoroughly screen and vet, and after they do that, then it goes to Korea, and they do it again. And we finally got confirmation that we were accepted, and we were going to be a Coyote dealership. Well, we then secured the building in Murfreesboro that I talked about a little bit ago, and we decided that our opening day would be January 1st, 2015. This would have been about 3 months before that in 2014. So, like September, probably, 2014. It was Jim and I, and we were employee number 1 and 2, and we did the renovation ourselves. There was, we were budgeted and we wanted to keep costs down. This place was painted everywhere in this hideous green. Not a John Deere green, which would have been equally awful. Just this deep green that was really hard to cover. And we painted and painted and painted and painted. The shop was, we re-insulated it, had problems with lighting and whatever. So, we spent a lot of time. We also then, when we were about done with it, we had my wife and her family and anybody else we could think of come in and help us deep clean the place. Ordered signs, applied for all the business licenses within the city of Murfreesboro, the state of Tennessee, did the whole sales tax, started a business, ordered business cards. It was a full-time job just getting ready to open. And which was, it was busy time, but not super fun time. The fun came when it was time to order our first load of inventory. I asked Tom MacArthur to help me with it. He knew the product better than I did, and he walked me through the process. And I remember the number. We had a budget of $300,000 for inventory, $300,000. And I was like, oh my goodness, $300,000. What if we fall on our faces, and what if nobody wants to buy them, and blah blah blah. Well, $300,000 now is a little. It seems laughable. We keep about $15 million in Coyote inventory, and $2 or $3 million in implements. So we're bumping it sometimes against that $20 million mark. So $300,000, but it was a big deal. I remember the day that the inventory started coming in, and the flatbeds came in, and each one held 3 or 4 tractors. We had a forklift that we bought, used out of somebody's barn. trying to save money. It was a bad forklift. Jim unloaded them. Jim did the final prep and everything, put them out front. I guess it was probably about 10 tractors. And we keep about 100, 120 now. And we opened not January 1st, January 2nd, January 1st, the holiday. And I was ready, man. I stood in the showroom and I had phones, had business cards, had tractors, had brochures, and I was ready. And nobody came. And nobody called. But the second day, I was just as excited. I showed up. I was suited up, showed up, and nobody came that day either, and nobody called. We sold the first tractor on the 17th of January, and I remember it was an RX 7320, and I remember calling Larry, and I said, well, we sold a tractor. And he said, well, that officially makes us a tractor dealer. And so we were. It was an interesting time because, as I knew it would be, people weren't familiar with the product. Most folks have never heard of it. And they'd come on the lot and they'd say, oh, I thought these were Kubotas. And well, no, they're not. They're Coyotes. And here, let me show them to you. And some people just, they'd jump back in their car and race off. But most people were polite and they'd let you show them the tractor and whatever. And we started selling a few. And month by month, we were gaining a little bit of momentum. And it was getting to be fun. Jason Buchanan, technician, was there by then, and I think we had hired somebody to help with deliveries by then. So there was probably 4, maybe 5 employees after about 4 months, and we were selling some tractors. We really didn't know what to do as far as advertising, and what we did first was we advertised 30-second commercials on our local Channel 5, which is a good CBS station. In the morning, we advertised on the news, and that is expensive. That is really expensive. In a market the size of Nashville, and the morning news, it wasn't cheap. And it wasn't great. It wasn't a great return on investment, but it takes time and it takes momentum and it takes repetitiveness. And so we kept doing it and kept doing it. I remember the day when everything changed. A gentleman came on the lot, and I ended up selling him a tractor, a DK 4510, with a loader and a couple implements. Sean is in the music industry here in Nashville, but from the production and video side. If you've seen a video by fill in the blank, he's probably been part of it. So the guy knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. He said, what do you do for advertising? And I said, we're on TV and, word of mouth. And he said, oh, yeah, that's great. He said, you ought to make videos and put them on YouTube. And I said, oh, make videos about what? He said, clearly about the tractors. He said, just stand there and talk about the tractor. Tell people about it. I said, I don't know, man. I would be too nervous to do that. And he said, well, it'll work. And then nothing really. And a few weeks later, he called with a question on his tractor. He said, did you ever do any videos on YouTube? And I said, no, man. I just can't. I can't muster up the courage. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, get a camera and a tripod and a microphone and go out there and find a tractor and talk about it. He said, and then send me the rough video. I'll edit it and show you how to post it. And I said, really? And he said, no, I want you to do this. And I did, and he did. The first one I did was an PX90. PX90, that was a 90 horsepower. That was the biggest tractor we had at the time, and a popular tractor for people that bought 90 horsepowers. And I looked like a mannequin standing there. It has 90 horsepower and it's a 4-wheel drive, and it's exactly what I sounded like. And it went on YouTube. That was our first video. About twice a month, I would film some video, send it to him, and he would edit it, and I would post it. And it started kind of being something. People were starting to refer to it. Somebody would come in or somebody would call and they'd say, hey, I saw your video on the whatever. Eventually, I bought the program Final Cut Pro, and I started learning how to edit. And as you know, I'm not great at it, but you know, I can do enough to cut and paste and do stuff. And we grew our viewership, and we grew our subscribers. We're at about 12,000 now. I wish we were at 112,000 or 412,000, but 12,000. And I appreciate every one of those 12,000 people. Hopefully you've subscribed. And it became our thing. People started referring to us. You know, that dealer in Tennessee that's on YouTube, that Coyote guy on YouTube. It became, you know, that was kind of our thing going on, and it was working, and it worked well. And so through that, and quite honestly, repeat and referral, and we had a good reputation. We didn't disappoint many people. You know, that was absolutely our driving goal. And we became a place, an honorable place to do business with, and we sold a bunch of tractors. I remember about just a few months into being in business, I asked the territory manager, Tom MacArthur, I said, who's the biggest Coyote dealer? Who's the biggest? And he said, what, in the country? I said, yeah. And he told me, and I'm not gonna embarrass him, but anyway, he told me, and they had been the #1 Coyote dealer for like 17 years in a row. And I said, well, I need to know how many they sell, because I want to sell more than that. And he said, why don't you just concentrate on gaining momentum and selling more? And I said, I know, and I'm going to do all that, but I want to know how many they sell, because I want to sell more. And by just under the third year, we did sell more, and we've to this day have been the largest every month for the past I don't know, 8 years. We kind of, I guess, caught the eye of Coyote, and my wife and I were invited to go to Korea with a small group of other dealers that they thought were performing well. And what an adventure! You know, I had not been out of the country. Well, my wife and I went to Victoria, Canada, but you know, Canada is kind of the same thing. But other than that one trip to Canada, I'd been nowhere. We got on a flight that was 13 hours long. Can you imagine, or maybe you've done it, 13 hours in an airplane, and I mean a nice airplane. I think it was an Airbus 380, so you know, it was a good-sized airplane. But still, you know, 13 hours is 13 hours. But when we got there, it was like Alice in Wonderland. It was so different. The airport was enormous. Certainly, you know, I mean, it was huge. A lot of people, of course. And we quickly found out that these were nice people. I'd heard so many horror stories about not really liking Americans and stuff. And that's not the case here. Quick story. We were touring the assembly plant, and we were invited to lunch in the employee cafeteria, and we were having lunch, and everybody was very nice. And if you're under 35 and you're Korean, you probably speak English, and you probably speak it better than me. A nice lady, she was probably in her 50s, and she said, have you ever been to our country before? I chuckled. I said, my dad was here in 1951. He was a Marine. And she looked real serious, and she sat down across from us, and she said, was he a soldier? And I said, no, he was a Marine. And she said, in 1951, so he was in the war. And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, those people are honored. They have our deepest gratitude and honor for those Americans, and there were some other countries too, but she said the Americans that fought here. And I'm like, wow, how nice, how un-French of you. You know, we actually did your country a solid and spent a lot of blood and treasure to do it. And they appreciated it. And I found that throughout the country, everybody seemed to, you know, be happy to have us there. There was none of the feeling like I was the ugly American. We were welcome there. And we have been back there again on another trip and found it to be the same way. It was wonderful. 13 days, city to city to city to city, and had a great time. It was just, anyway, it was culture, you know. We went to the museums they had. We went to the Soldiers Memorial. You know, the 1950 to 1953 was a big deal. They have a wall that's very similar to our Vietnam veterans, or Vietnam wall, and it's at their Soldiers Memorial, and they have the name and country of every soldier, sailor, Marine that died in for the liberation of their country, all the way from the tens of thousands of Americans down to the 2 Ethiopians. It was a United Nations fight, if you know your history, and so many countries, you know, Australia, Canada, many countries fought. Of course, the U.S. You know, had the greatest investment and lost by far the most soldiers, sailors, and Marines. But I'll never forget that lady. And I thought, what a nice thing to remember 75 years later. And it meant a lot to me. So she was cool. By this time, Coyote was, you know, they were not only watching us, they appreciated having us. We were selling a lot of tractors. And they've always, and I can say they've always been a tremendously appreciated, valuable partner. They're never has it been an us and them relationship. And some of the franchises that I've tried before, I told you, you know, we had Makita and whatever, where you're just a number. It's not like that with these people. I could pick up the phone and call anybody if I needed to, including the president of KUSA, Coyote USA, and pick up the phone, and that's how these people are. And then part of it was that we were selling a lot of tractors, but I think they would probably be like that with just about anybody. They've been a great partner. A quick story about finding an implement company. You know, selling tractors is great, but you need the stuff that hangs off the back of it too: box scrapers, rotary cutters, tillers. You get the idea. And so we needed a company that had a full line and somebody that we could deal with. We were a new company. I'm talking when we first opened. We were a new company and we needed a partner. I called or emailed every company I could think of, and just reject after reject. And the one that sticks out though is Bush Hog. I filled out the thing online, want to be a dealer, and a couple days later, a nice lady from Bush Hog showed up. She was their territory manager, and she kind of looked at me the way you would when you find something stuck to the bottom of your shoe that won't come off. She said, I know this is not a good fit for Bush Hog. This is Coyote Tractors and a new company. She said, no, thank you for applying. And off she went. And man, it hurt my feelings. We signed up then with Titan Equipment, which is now Ironcraft. Titan Equipment is 6 months older than Larry Stove Sand Equipment. They showed up one day with a old Dodge truck, a flatbed trailer, and a couple of rotary cutters, and they said, he said, my dad and I broke away from Kodiak. We worked at Kodiak, which is a implement company in East Tennessee. They make good stuff. We broke away from them, and now we're building our own, also in a little town in East Tennessee, Decatur, Tennessee. And I looked at them, and they looked like nice products. The paint was good, the price was good. You know, they were fine. So we took them on. We're now their biggest dealer, but we grew together. You know, it was fun. Companies were the same age, and you know, both at one time 2-man operations, and they're enormous. They're the biggest implement company now in North America. A couple of years ago, we're selling a bunch of tractors, we're selling a bunch of implements, and the same lady comes into the Murfreesboro store, and I was there that day, and she asked to talk to somebody about maybe becoming a Bush Hog dealer. She completely forgot what had happened 8 years earlier. And so, you know, I talked to her for a few minutes, and I listened, and she said, you know, we could really use a big dealer like you to carry our line, da-da-da-da-da-da. And I said, you don't remember me. I said, you came by 8 years ago and couldn't get out of here fast enough and said that we were not a good fit for bush hog. I said, yeah, and yet here you are. So that was a cool feeling. Just a random story. That's about it. I don't know what else to say. That's kind of who we are and where we came from. What do I say? The thousands of people that have bought tractors from us, the folks that support us even by, subscribing to our channel. Thank you to the staff members here, and I hate even calling them that. The friends I work with. How about that? The friends I work with. They'll watch the video. Thank you. I don't tell you often enough. Thank you. And if you're interested in a Coyote tractor, I can't help it. I do sell for a living. If you're interested in a Coyote tractor, no matter where you are, I'd like to take a swing at your business. And if not, I highly recommend Coyote tractors. They make good stuff. And, just pick you a good dealer, though. Pick you a good dealer. Thank you. Thank you for enduring all this yammering. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Bye.